When Jesus declared, "I and the Father are one," he was not claiming a privilege reserved for himself alone. He was revealing the fundamental truth of your own being, a truth that has been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. This statement is not theology. It is the master key to spiritual healing, abundance, and inner peace that transforms everything. Most people hear these words and think Jesus was speaking only of his unique relationship with God. But Joel Goldsmith understood what the mystics have always known. Jesus was teaching the universal principle of identity. He was showing you that the same infinite consciousness that flowed through him flows through you right now, in this very moment, without exception. The tragedy is that humanity has worshipped the man instead of practicing the principle. We have made Jesus exceptional rather than exemplary. We have placed him on a pedestal so high that his teachings became unreachable. But today you are going to discover what happens when you truly understand what he meant, and your life will never be the same again. The phrase, "I and the Father are one," is not a statement about Jesus, the person walking the dusty roads of Galilee. The I he spoke of is not the human form, the body, or the personality. It is the divine consciousness, the infinite, invisible presence that he recognized as his true identity. When you understand this distinction, everything in your spiritual life shifts dramatically. Joel Goldsmith spent decades helping people realize this truth through his teachings and writings. He taught that the moment you recognize your oneness with the Father, you are no longer living as a separate human being hoping for divine intervention from somewhere outside yourself. You are living as the very presence of God expressing itself in human form. Consider what this means practically in your daily experience. When you say, "I am," you are speaking the name of God revealed to Moses in the burning bush. Every time you declare your true identity, you are invoking infinite power, wisdom, and supply. But if you follow "I am" with limitation like "I am sick" or "I am poor," you deny your oneness with the Father. Here is what begins to happen when this realization takes root in your consciousness and transforms your experience. First, you stop begging God for things as if the divine were separate from you and withholding good. You recognize that the Father's infinite abundance is already the substance of your being, closer than your breath, nearer than your hands and feet. Second, you lose the fear of lack, disease, and death that has controlled humanity for millennia. These things seem real only when you believe you are a separate mortal being disconnected from your source. But when you realize "I and the Father are one," you understand that infinite life is your true nature. Nothing can be added to you, and nothing can be taken away from you. Third, your prayers change completely from begging to recognition, from pleading to resting in truth. You no longer ask God to heal you because you realize there is no separation between you and the healing presence. You simply recognize what is already true. Wholeness, completeness, and perfection are your spiritual reality, and this recognition becomes the healing itself. Joel Goldsmith called this understanding Christ consciousness, and it is not reserved for saints or mystics alone. It is your birthright, your true identity that has been waiting for you to claim it. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he was pointing to this exact realization. The infinite is not distant. It is the very consciousness reading these words right now. But here is where most spiritual seekers make a critical mistake that blocks their progress entirely. They try to become one with God through effort, meditation techniques, or moral perfection. They believe oneness is something they must achieve in the future. This is impossible because oneness is not a goal. It is already the fact of your being established before the world began. You cannot become what you already are. You can only recognize it, accept it, and live from it consciously. This recognition is what Jesus demonstrated throughout his ministry. He did not heal people by asking God for special favors. He recognized the truth of their being, the oneness that disease and limitation could not touch, and that recognition dissolved the appearance of separation. Let me share what happened to a woman named Margaret who studied with Joel Goldsmith for 3 years before this truth finally broke through her intellectual understanding. She had been suffering from a chronic illness that doctors could not diagnose or cure. She prayed daily, attended every spiritual lecture, read every mystical text, yet nothing changed in her condition. One morning during meditation, she stopped asking God to heal her body. She stopped affirming health or denying disease. Instead, she simply rested in the statement, I and the Father are one. Not as a repetition or mantra, but as a deep recognition of what was already true. In that moment of pure recognition without effort or agenda, something shifted in her consciousness. Within 2 weeks, every symptom had disappeared completely, and they never returned. Her doctors were baffled, but Margaret understood what had happened. She had stopped trying to fix a sick mortal and recognized her true identity as the infinite expression of divine life. The illness was not healed. The illusion of separation was dissolved, and health was simply the natural state revealed. Another student, a businessman named Robert, faced bankruptcy after his company collapsed during an economic downturn. He had been practicing affirmations for prosperity, visualizing abundance, doing everything the success teachers told him to do. Nothing worked. His debt grew deeper, and desperation consumed him daily as creditors demanded payment. Then, Robert attended one of Joel's classes where he heard this teaching about oneness. At first, he resisted it because it seemed too simple, too abstract for his concrete financial crisis, but desperation made him willing to try anything. He began each day not by worrying about money or visualizing checks, but by recognizing, I and the Father are one, therefore infinite supply is my nature. Over the next 6 months, opportunities appeared that he could never have planned or predicted. A former colleague offered him a partnership. An unexpected inheritance came from a distant relative. New clients appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Within a year, Robert was not only debt-free, but more prosperous than before. The difference was that now he understood the source of his supply was consciousness itself, not circumstances. A third example comes from a mother whose teenage son had been arrested for drug possession and was facing serious jail time. She was consumed with fear, guilt, and helplessness. She blamed herself, blamed her ex-husband, blamed society. Her prayers were desperate pleas for God to intervene and fix her son, to change the judge's mind, to make the problem disappear magically. Joel Goldsmith taught her something radical that challenged everything she believed about prayer and healing. He told her to stop seeing her son as a troubled teenager who needed saving. Instead, recognize the truth of his being, that he too is one with the Father, that his true identity is divine consciousness, not the mistakes or the addiction or the legal trouble. For weeks she practiced this recognition in silence, not trying to change her son, but resting in the truth of what he really was beneath all appearances. Gradually, her son began to change from within. He entered rehabilitation willingly, took responsibility for his actions, and the judge showed unexpected mercy. The external circumstances shifted because the mother's consciousness had shifted first from fear to recognition of oneness. These stories reveal a pattern that Joel Goldsmith observed throughout his decades of spiritual healing work. When people stop trying to demonstrate things and instead recognize their oneness with infinite consciousness, transformation happens naturally. The form it takes may vary, but the principle remains constant. Recognition of truth dissolves the appearance of separation and limitation. This is not positive thinking or mental manipulation. This is not about convincing yourself that problems do not exist. It is about recognizing what exists beyond the level of problem and solution. When you truly understand I and the Father are one, you are not fixing a broken reality. You are waking up from the dream of separation into the truth that has always been. The question is not whether this principle works. The question is whether you are willing to let go of your limited sense of self and recognize the infinite as your true identity. This requires a death of sorts, not physical death, but the death of the belief that you are a small, separate, vulnerable person at the mercy of circumstances beyond your control. If these transformation stories resonate with your heart and inspire your spiritual journey, like this video to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, subscribe for more mystical Christianity teachings, and comment below. Which story touched you most deeply and why? Now let us explore practical techniques that help you live from this recognition of oneness throughout your day. The first technique Joel Goldsmith taught is what he called the practice of the presence. This is not complicated. It is simply pausing throughout your day to remember, the infinite is here, now, as the very consciousness I am. Not somewhere else, not in the future, but here. When you wake in the morning, before your feet touch the floor, take 30 seconds to recognize, I and the Father are one. not as words to achieve something, but as acknowledgement of what is already true. Let this recognition set the tone for your entire day. You are not a limited person hoping to connect with God. You are the presence of God awakening to itself in human form. During challenging moments at work, in relationships, or facing difficult decisions, pause again. Do not immediately react from fear or ego. Take a breath and remember your true identity. From this recognition, wisdom flows naturally. Solutions appear that the anxious human mind could never conceive. This is not magic. This is the natural intelligence of infinite consciousness operating through you when you stop blocking it with false identity. The second technique is what Joel called releasing the mental image. Every problem you face exists first as a mental image in your consciousness. You have a picture of yourself as sick, poor, alone, or inadequate. This mental image is what needs to dissolve, not the external circumstance. The circumstance is only the outer reflection of the inner image you hold. When you recognize I and the Father are one, you are releasing the mental image of yourself as a limited mortal. You are not trying to improve that image or make it better. You are letting it go completely and resting in your true identity as infinite consciousness. This is why affirmations often fail. They are trying to improve the false image rather than releasing it entirely. Practice this now with whatever challenge you face. Stop trying to solve it on the level of the problem. Stop trying to be a better version of your limited self. Instead, release the entire mental image of yourself as the one with the problem. Recognize that the real you, the I that is one with the Father, has no problem to solve because it is already complete, whole, and infinite. The third technique Joel taught is living by grace, not effort. When you understand your oneness with the Father, you realize that the infinite is living your life, not you. The divine intelligence that created galaxies and orchestrates nature is the same intelligence breathing your body, beating your heart, and guiding your path. You do not have to make things happen through struggle and force. This does not mean you become passive or lazy. It means you stop acting from anxiety and start acting from inspiration. You listen for the inner prompting, the gentle guidance that comes from recognizing yourself as the instrument through which infinite wisdom flows. Your actions become effortless because they arise from alignment with your true nature rather than from desperate human effort. Joel often said, "Do not try to demonstrate supply, health, or harmony. Let the Father demonstrate itself as these things through you." This shift from doing to allowing is the key. You are not the creator. You are the channel through which the Creator expresses. When you try to be the creator, you exhaust yourself. When you recognize yourself as the channel, infinite energy flows through you without depletion. The fourth practice is maintaining what Joel called the altitude of consciousness. Your state of consciousness determines what you experience in the outer world. When you live from the recognition I and the Father are one, you are living at a high altitude where storms cannot reach you. Problems that devastate others cannot touch the consciousness that knows its oneness with the infinite. This altitude is not maintained through constant effort or vigilance. It is maintained through regular periods of silence and recognition. Joel recommended at least 2 periods daily where you withdraw from the world and rest in conscious oneness. Not to get something or achieve something, but simply to remember what is true. These periods of silence recharge your consciousness and keep you living from truth rather than appearances. During these silent times, do not fill your mind with words, affirmations, or requests. Simply be still and recognize the presence that you are. Let thoughts come and go without engaging them. Rest in the I am that needs nothing, seeks nothing, and lacks nothing. This is not meditation technique. This is conscious communion with your own true nature as one with the Father. But let us be honest about the challenges you will face in living this truth, because Joel Goldsmith never sugar-coated the spiritual path. The first major obstacle is doubt. Your human mind will constantly question whether this oneness is really true. Every problem that appears will seem like evidence that you are separate, limited, and vulnerable. This doubt is natural and expected. Joel taught that doubt is not your enemy. It is simply the old consciousness resisting its own dissolution. When doubt arises, do not fight it or feel guilty about it. simply return to recognition. I and the Father are one is not something you must believe. It is something you recognize as true despite what appearances suggest. Faith is not blind belief. Faith is loyalty to truth even when circumstances seem to contradict it. The second obstacle is impatience. You may practice this recognition for days or weeks and see no change in your circumstances. The human mind wants instant results, immediate proof. But consciousness transformation does not work on human timelines. Joel often said it took him years of practice before this truth became his living experience, rather than just an intellectual concept he understood. The third challenge is the influence of mass consciousness. You live in a world where billions of people believe in separation, limitation, and fear. This collective belief is powerful. It bombards you daily through media, conversations, and cultural conditioning. Even when you have moments of clear recognition, the weight of mass consciousness can pull you back into forgetfulness and doubt. Joel taught that you cannot change mass consciousness, but you can protect yourself from its influence. This requires vigilance, not in fighting against negativity, but in consciously choosing which consciousness you will accept as yours. When world news triggers fear, pause and remember, I and the Father are one. Therefore, I live in a different universe than the one presented by fearful appearances. This is not denial or avoiding reality. This is recognizing which reality is true. The world of separation, conflict, and limitation is the false reality created by collective human belief. The world of oneness, harmony, and infinite supply is the true reality created by divine consciousness. You choose which world you inhabit by the consciousness you maintain throughout your day. The fourth obstacle is the tendency to use this truth as a technique to get things rather than as a revelation of what you already are. Many people hear, I and the Father are one, and immediately think, great, now I can use this to manifest money, heal my body, or attract my soulmate. This completely misses the point and blocks the very transformation you seek. Joel was very clear about this pitfall. He said that the moment you try to use spiritual truth for personal gain, you have lost the truth entirely. You have made God a servant to your human desires, rather than recognizing that the human you think you are does not even exist. There is only God, expressing as infinite forms, and you are one of those forms. When you truly understand I and the Father are one, you stop wanting things because you recognize you already are everything. The desire for more money implies lack. The desire for health implies disease. The desire for love implies loneliness. But the consciousness that knows its oneness with infinite fullness has no desires. It simply lives, expresses, and allows divine will to unfold perfectly. The fifth challenge is what Joel called taking thought, which means mentally planning, worrying, and trying to figure out how things will work. The human mind is addicted to control. It wants to know the plan, see the path, and manage the details. But living from oneness requires releasing mental control completely and trusting the intelligence that governs all creation. This does not mean you stop thinking or making practical decisions. It means you stop anxious thinking, fearful planning, and trying to manipulate outcomes. When you need to make a decision, you quiet your mind and listen for inner guidance. The answer comes not from analyzing pros and cons, but from the still small voice of infinite wisdom that knows exactly what is needed in every moment. Joel taught a simple practice for this. When faced with a decision, do not immediately engage your thinking mind. First, recognize your oneness with infinite intelligence. Wait in silence until you feel a sense of rightness about a particular direction. Then act on that inner knowing without second-guessing it. This is living by grace rather than by the mental gymnastics of the separated human mind. If these practical challenges and solutions are helping you break through spiritual obstacles, like this video to support transformative content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith teachings, and comment, which obstacle resonates most with your current journey? Now let us explore how this recognition of oneness transforms specific areas of your life in ways that may surprise you. First, your relationship with money and supply changes completely when you understand that abundance is not something you get from the world. It is something that flows through you from the infinite consciousness that you are one with, expressing as every form of good. A student of Joel's was a schoolteacher earning a modest salary, constantly worried about making ends meet. She practiced recognizing her oneness with infinite supply daily, not to get more money, but to realize that her source was consciousness, not her paycheck. Within months, she inherited property from a relative she barely knew. Then her school district offered her a prestigious position with double her previous salary. But the real transformation was not in the increased income. It was in her complete freedom from financial anxiety. She knew with absolute certainty that regardless of circumstances, the infinite would always express as whatever was needed, because she and the infinite were one. This inner knowing made her magnetic to opportunities that were invisible to consciousness, still believing in lack and separation. Your relationships transform dramatically when you recognize that the people in your life are not separate beings who can withhold love or approval from you. They are expressions of the one infinite consciousness, just as you are. When you stop seeking fulfillment from others and recognize your oneness with infinite love, your relationships shift from needy transactions to free expressions of shared divinity. One man had been divorced 3 times, each relationship ending in bitterness and blame. He met Joel at a lecture and learned this principle of oneness. For the first time, he stopped looking for a woman to complete him and instead recognized his completeness in oneness with the Father. He spent a year in this recognition without seeking any relationship at all. Then he met someone, but this time the relationship was completely different. There was no neediness, no fear of loss, no attempts to change or control the other person. Both individuals were whole, expressing their oneness with the infinite and choosing to share that expression together. The relationship thrived not because they needed each other, but because they were free to love without the burden of incompleteness. Your physical health transforms when you stop believing your body is a material object subject to disease, decay, and death. Joel taught that your body is consciousness made visible, the outer form of the infinite life that you are. When you recognize I and the Father are one, you realize that infinite life is your only life, and that life knows no disease or limitation. A woman diagnosed with a supposedly incurable condition attended Joel's classes regularly. She stopped all medical treatment, not out of rebellion, but out of deep recognition that her true life was spiritual and eternal. Every day she affirmed not as a mental exercise, but as recognition of fact. The life I live is the life of the Father. Infinite life is expressing as this body, and infinite life knows no disease. Over 18 months, her symptoms gradually disappeared, and eventual medical tests showed no trace of the disease. Her doctors called it spontaneous remission. She called it recognition of truth. The body had not been healed. The false belief that her life was mortal and material had been dissolved, and health was simply the natural expression of infinite life that had always been present. Your work and life purpose transform when you stop believing you must find your purpose or create success through human effort. Joel taught that infinite consciousness already has a plan for its own expression through you. Your only job is to recognize your oneness and allow that divine plan to unfold without interference from human ambition, fear, or control. One young artist struggled for years trying to make a living from his paintings, constantly rejected by galleries and ignored by critics. He was ready to quit and get a regular job when someone introduced him to Joel's teachings. He began practicing recognition of his oneness with infinite creativity. He stopped painting to please galleries or critics and simply allowed infinite creativity to express through him. Within a year, his work began attracting attention from unexpected sources. A prominent collector discovered him through a small local exhibition. Commissions began flowing, but more importantly, he found joy in the creative process itself because he was no longer creating from ego or need. He was the instrument through which infinite beauty expressed itself, and that expression naturally attracted its perfect channels of distribution and appreciation. As you live daily from this recognition of oneness, you begin to notice something profound happening in your consciousness. The things that used to disturb you no longer have power over you. The opinions of others, the fluctuations of circumstances, the threats of the world lose their ability to shake your inner foundation. You have found the rock upon which Christ told you to build your house. This is not because you have become cold or indifferent. You still engage with life fully, perhaps more fully than before, but you engage from a different place. You engage as the infinite expressing temporarily in human form, rather than as a frightened mortal hoping to survive and thrive in a hostile world. This shift in identity changes everything about how you experience each moment. Joel called this state living in the secret place of the Most High. It is a consciousness that knows itself as one with God, therefore untouchable by anything that belongs to the world of appearances. Problems still arise, challenges still appear, but they cannot penetrate the consciousness that rests in recognized oneness. They are like storms that rage on the surface while the depths remain eternally still and peaceful. You also discover that the more you live from this recognition, the less you feel the need to convince others or defend your beliefs. Truth needs no defense. When you know your oneness with the Father, you have nothing to prove. You simply live your life as a witness to that truth, and those who are ready will recognize it without any persuasion from you. This eliminates the exhausting need to argue, convince, or convert anyone to your way of seeing. Joel taught that consciousness is not changed by words or arguments. It is changed by recognition. When you live from oneness, you carry a vibration that others can feel even if they cannot articulate it. Some will be drawn to you and want to know your secret. Others will resist or reject you. Either response is perfect. Your only responsibility is to maintain your own recognition of truth. You are not here to save the world or fix anyone else. You are here to recognize your oneness with the Father and allow that recognition to dissolve any appearance of separation in your own experience. As you do this, you become a light in the darkness, not through preaching or teaching, but through being what you truly are. There comes a moment in this practice when intellectual understanding becomes living experience. Joel described it as a shift that cannot be explained, only known. You are no longer trying to believe I and the Father are one. You simply know it with a knowing that requires no external validation or proof. This knowing becomes the foundation of your entire existence. When this shift happens, prayer becomes entirely different. You do not pray to change God's mind or get God to do something. You pray simply to recognize what is already true. Your prayer becomes, reveal to me the truth of this situation. Show me what is real beyond the appearance. And in the silence that follows, truth reveals itself not as words, but as knowing, as peace, as the dissolution of whatever seemed to be a problem. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives." The peace the world offers is temporary, dependent on circumstances being favorable. The peace that comes from recognizing your oneness with the Father is permanent, independent of any circumstance. It is the peace of knowing who you really are, beyond all the false identities that the world has taught you to embrace. So here is what happens when you truly understand what Jesus meant by I and the Father are one. You stop living as a separate fragment hoping to connect with something greater. You recognize yourself as the very presence of infinite consciousness expressing in this particular time and space. You realize that every quality of God is your quality because there is no separation. This recognition does not make you arrogant or superior to others. It makes you humble because you realize you can take no credit for anything. The infinite is living your life. You are simply the transparency through which it shines. Your only task is to remain clear, to not block the light with false beliefs, fears, and limitations that arise from the illusion of separation. Joel Goldsmith spent his life teaching this one truth in countless ways. You are not separate from God. You are not distant from the kingdom. You are not waiting to become spiritual. You are already the fullness of infinite consciousness expressing itself. The moment you recognize this, your search ends and your real life begins. Not the life of striving and becoming, but the life of being and expressing what you have always been. If your understanding of Jesus' deepest teaching has been transformed through these Joel Goldsmith insights, like this video now, subscribe for more mystical wisdom, and comment, I am one with the Father, to claim this truth as your living reality. Most people hear Jesus say, my burden is light, and think he's offering comfort for their heavy struggles. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something revolutionary that changes everything. Jesus wasn't talking about making your problems easier to carry. He was revealing that when you live from Christ consciousness, there is no burden at all. The weight you feel isn't real, it's the false sense of separation from God. What if every heavy burden you're carrying right now is just a mistaken belief? Joel taught that the moment you recognize your true identity as spiritual consciousness, the entire structure of human struggle collapses. Not gradually, not eventually, but in the instant of clear recognition. This isn't positive thinking or mental tricks. It's the fundamental shift that Jesus himself demonstrated. Here's what actually happens in that shift. You stop trying to fix, heal, change, or improve anything in the material realm. Instead, you rest in the awareness that God's presence is already complete, already perfect, already whole. The burden vanishes because you see there never was a real burden to begin with, only a dream of separation that seemed real until you woke up. Joel Goldsmith spent decades teaching students this precise recognition technique. He called it the practice of impersonalization, where you stop giving power to appearances and rest in spiritual truth. When Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light," he was describing the actual experience of living from this consciousness. Not the experience of a better human life, but the recognition that human struggle itself is illusion. Think about what Jesus meant by yoke. A yoke connects two oxen to share the work of pulling a heavy load. But Jesus is saying his yoke is easy because in Christ consciousness, there's no work to do at all. You're not pulling anything. You're not carrying anything. You're simply being the presence of God that you already are, have always been, and cannot stop being. This is where most spiritual seekers make their fatal mistake. They try to use consciousness techniques to improve their human experience, to manifest better circumstances, to heal their bodies. But Joel taught that the real transformation happens when you stop trying to change anything and simply recognize what's already eternally true. That recognition itself is the entire teaching. Let me show you exactly how this works in practical terms. When a problem appears in your experience, whether it's financial pressure, relationship conflict, or physical pain, your first instinct is to fix it, pray about it, or try to change it. But that approach keeps you trapped in the illusion that the problem is real and has power. Joel's technique is radically different and infinitely more effective. Instead of addressing the problem, you turn within to recognize spiritual truth. You don't deny the appearance, but you refuse to give it the power of your belief. You silently acknowledge that God's presence knows nothing of this problem, that in consciousness there is no lack, no conflict, no disease. Not because you're creating a better reality, but because you're recognizing the only reality that exists. This is what makes the burden light. You're no longer trying to carry it, heal it, or solve it. You're seeing through it to the truth that was always there. Joel called this the revelation of oneness, the recognition that nothing exists but God and God's perfect expression. When you really see that, when you really know that, the burden simply isn't there anymore because it never was. Here's the part that challenges everything you've been taught about prayer and spirituality. Joel discovered that Jesus wasn't teaching a method to get God to help you with your burdens. He was revealing that in your true identity as Christ consciousness, burdens cannot exist. The light burden isn't a lighter version of human struggle. It's the complete absence of struggle when you stop believing in separation. Most people spend their entire spiritual journey trying to become more conscious, more awakened, more enlightened. But Joel taught that you cannot become what you already are. You are already the full presence of God. You are already complete spiritual consciousness. The only thing standing between you and that recognition is your belief in the reality of material appearances and human problems. When you truly understand this teaching, something shifts in your entire being. You stop fighting, stop struggling, stop trying to improve your human self, not because you've given up, but because you've woken up to the truth that there is no human self to improve. There is only God being itself as your individual consciousness. That's why the burden is light. It literally disappears in the light of truth. Let me share what happened to Robert, a successful attorney who came to Joel's teachings after years of crushing anxiety. Robert had everything the world defines as success: a prestigious career, financial security, a loving family. But he carried a constant weight of worry about losing it all, about not being enough, about the next crisis waiting around the corner. He tried therapy, medication, meditation apps. Nothing touched the core burden. When Robert first heard Joel explain that his burden wasn't real, He felt angry. Of course it was real. He could feel it in his chest every morning. But Joel's teaching kept working on him. He started practicing the recognition technique, not to feel better, but to see the truth. For 3 weeks, nothing changed. Then one morning, sitting quietly before work, something shifted completely. Robert suddenly saw that the anxiety he'd been carrying for decades had no actual source. There was no real threat, no actual problem, only his belief in separation from God's presence. In that moment of clear seeing, the burden simply vanished. Not because his circumstances changed, but because he recognized they had never had the power he'd given them. He described it as waking from a nightmare and realizing none of it was ever real. Here's what makes this different from every other spiritual teaching you've encountered. Joel wasn't offering a technique to manage your burdens better or reduce their weight. He was showing you how to see through the entire illusion of burden itself. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Not rest from your problems, but rest in the recognition that problems have no reality in God. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly try to improve your life, heal your body, fix your relationships, increase your abundance. That exhaustion comes from believing that you're a limited human being who needs to become something more. But Joel taught that you're already the infinite presence of God, already complete, already whole. The burden of self-improvement vanishes when you stop trying to improve what doesn't actually exist. This is why Jesus could say, "My burden is light," while facing crucifixion. He wasn't pretending the experience wasn't difficult. He was living from a consciousness that knew his true identity couldn't be touched by any human experience. The same consciousness is your true identity right now. Not something you need to achieve or develop, but something you need to recognize and rest in. Linda, a nurse working in intensive care, discovered this truth in the most challenging circumstances. She watched suffering every day, felt the weight of families in crisis, carried home the grief of patients who didn't survive. Traditional spiritual practices told her to protect her energy, create boundaries, practice self-care. But the burden kept growing heavier, no matter what she did to manage it. Then Linda began studying Joel's teaching on impersonalization. She learned to look at each situation, no matter how tragic it appeared, and recognize that God's presence was the only reality. Not to deny the human experience, but to see beyond it to the spiritual truth that couldn't be touched by disease or death. This practice transformed her entire experience of nursing without changing a single external circumstance. Within 2 months, Linda noticed she no longer carried the weight home. Not because she cared less, but because she'd stopped giving reality to the appearances of suffering. She could be fully present with patients and families while resting in the recognition that their true spiritual identity was untouched and perfect. The burden became light because she saw it had no foundation in truth, only in the belief that matter and material circumstances were real and powerful. What Joel discovered is that Jesus wasn't speaking metaphorically when he said, "My burden is light." He was describing the actual experience of consciousness that knows its true identity. In that consciousness, there is no heavy burden to carry, because there is no separated self to carry it. There is only God being itself as infinite individual expression, and God knows nothing of burden, struggle, or effort. This is the secret that changes everything. You're not trying to lighten your burdens through spiritual practice. You're recognizing that in your true nature as consciousness itself, burdens cannot exist. They appear to exist only when you believe you're a limited material being separate from God. The instant you recognize your actual spiritual identity, the entire structure of burden collapses like a dream, vanishes when you wake. Joel spent 40 years teaching students this one truth in countless different ways. The burden is light not because God helps you carry it, but because the recognition of God as your only reality dissolves every burden instantly. This isn't theory or philosophy, it's the practical mysticism that Jesus lived and Joel Goldsmith taught with absolute clarity. If this revelation about Jesus' true meaning speaks to your heart, like this video to share these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment which burden you're ready to see through to the truth beneath it. Now that you understand the foundation, Joel taught 3 specific practices that help you live from this consciousness throughout your day. The first is what he called the practice of pausing. Whenever you feel the weight of a burden beginning to form in your awareness, You pause completely, not to think about the problem or pray about it, but to remember that you're not a human being trying to reach God. You're God consciousness itself having a human experience. In that pause, you don't try to change anything or fix anything. You simply rest in the recognition that whatever appears as a burden has no reality in consciousness. Joel would say, see it, don't be it. You see the appearance without becoming identified with it as your problem. This takes practice because your conditioning is to immediately engage with problems as if they're real and you need to solve them. But as you practice pausing and resting in spiritual identity, something remarkable happens. The burdens that used to dominate your thoughts and drain your energy begin to lose their grip. Not because they go away, but because you're no longer feeding them with the belief that they're real. Joel called this starving the problem of your attention and belief, while nourishing the truth of spiritual wholeness. The second technique Joel taught is recognizing the nothingness of appearance. This sounds abstract until you actually practice it and experience its power. When a burden appears, whether it's a frightening diagnosis, a financial crisis, or a relationship breakdown, you look directly at it and recognize that it has no cause, no law supporting it, and no reality in God. Therefore, it's nothing trying to appear as something. Joel was very specific about this practice. You're not denying that the appearance exists in the material realm. You're recognizing that it has no spiritual substance, no actual power, no reality in consciousness. It's like recognizing that the monster in your nightmare can't hurt you, because it has no existence outside the dream. The moment you see its nothingness, its power over you dissolves completely. Christopher, a financial advisor, used this technique during the market crash that threatened his entire career. Instead of panicking or trying to control outcomes, he practiced seeing the financial crisis as having no reality in God's consciousness. Within 3 weeks, opportunities began appearing that he would have missed in his usual state of anxious problem-solving. The burden lifted not because circumstances improved, but because he stopped giving reality to the appearance of crisis. The third practice Joel emphasized is what he called living by grace. This means recognizing that you don't have to make anything happen, fix anything, or become anything. Grace is the activity of God consciousness being itself as your experience without any effort from you. When Jesus said, "My yoke is easy," he was describing the experience of letting grace live your life instead of trying to live it yourself. Most people struggle with this because they've been conditioned to believe that they must take action, make things happen, control outcomes. But Joel taught that this belief in personal responsibility and personal power is actually what creates the burden. When you recognize that God consciousness is the only power and presence, you relax into allowing that consciousness to express itself as your perfect experience. This doesn't mean you become passive or inactive. It means your actions flow from consciousness rather than from fear, need, or the belief that you must make things happen. Jessica, a small business owner, discovered this when she stopped striving to grow her company and instead rested in recognizing God as her supply. Within 6 months, her business doubled, not because she worked harder, but because she stopped working from burden and started allowing grace to unfold naturally. Here's how these 3 practices work together to keep the burden light in your daily experience. You pause to remember your spiritual identity. You recognize the nothingness of whatever appears as a burden, and you rest in grace, allowing consciousness to live itself as your experience. This isn't a formula you follow to get results. It's a way of being that naturally emerges when you stop believing you're a limited human self. Joel taught that the more you practice these recognitions, the more they become your natural state of consciousness. You stop alternating between spiritual awareness and human struggle. You begin to live from a consistent recognition that you are consciousness itself, that burdens have no reality, and that grace is always operating as your experience whether you see it or not. What makes the burden light is that you're no longer carrying it. You've recognized that the self you thought was carrying burdens doesn't actually exist. There is only God consciousness being itself as your individual awareness. From that recognition, everything becomes effortless because you're not trying to be or do anything. You're simply being what you already are and always have been. Let's be honest about the challenges you'll face when you start practicing this consciousness. The biggest obstacle is that your entire conditioning screams at you that the burden is real, that you must do something about it, that ignoring it will make things worse. Every part of your trained human response fights against simply resting in spiritual recognition and doing nothing to fix the problem. Daniel experienced this intensely when he tried to apply Joel's teaching to his failing marriage. His wife had moved out. Divorce seemed inevitable, and everyone told him he needed to fight for the relationship. But Joel's teaching said to recognize that in God, there is no separation, no relationship to fix, only perfect spiritual union. For weeks, Daniel felt like he was doing nothing while his marriage collapsed. What Daniel discovered is that doing nothing humanly doesn't mean nothing is happening spiritually. As he practiced recognizing the spiritual perfection beneath the appearance of separation, something shifted in his consciousness. He stopped being desperate, stopped trying to control outcomes, stopped believing the appearance of marriage breakdown was the truth. After 2 months of this practice, his wife called wanting to talk, and they began a completely new relationship based on consciousness rather than need. Another challenge is what Joel called the temptation to return to human solutions. You practice the recognition for a while, see some results, then when a new burden appears, you immediately forget everything and go back to trying to fix it humanly. This is completely normal and happens to everyone who practices this consciousness. The key is catching yourself and returning to recognition without judgment. Amanda faced this repeatedly during her journey with chronic pain. She would practice seeing through the appearance of disease to spiritual wholeness, feel relief. Then the moment pain returned, she'd panic and go back to desperate searches for medical solutions. Joel taught that this back and forth is part of the process. You're not failing, you're learning to trust consciousness more than appearance. What finally shifted for Amanda was realizing that even her inability to maintain the recognition consistently was just another appearance to see through. She stopped judging herself for forgetting and simply returned to truth each time she remembered. Over 6 months, the periods of clear recognition grew longer, the pain's grip weakened, and eventually she found herself living from consciousness naturally, without having to constantly remind herself. The third major challenge is isolation from people who don't understand this consciousness. When you stop complaining about your burdens, stop seeking sympathy, stop trying to fix everything, people think something's wrong with you. They may accuse you of being in denial, of not facing reality, of abandoning your responsibilities. This can create intense pressure to return to normal human struggle. Kenneth, a corporate executive, faced this when he stopped participating in the constant complaining and problem-solving that dominated his workplace culture. Colleagues thought he'd become cold or checked out. His boss worried he'd lost his edge. But Kenneth was actually more effective than ever because he was working from consciousness rather than from stress and burden. He just looked different to people still living from human struggle. Joel warned that this path can be lonely at times. You're living from a consciousness that most people don't recognize or understand. But he also taught that the peace and freedom you experience are worth any external misunderstanding. Kenneth eventually found that his consistent, peaceful presence began attracting others who sensed something different about him, and small conversations about consciousness began opening naturally. Here's the challenge that stops most people completely. There will be times when you practice recognition perfectly, maintain consciousness beautifully, and the burden not only doesn't lift but seems to get heavier. This is when most people conclude that Joel's teaching doesn't work and return to traditional spiritual methods or give up entirely. But Joel taught that this experience is actually a crucial part of the transformation. What's happening in those moments is that your recognition is bringing to the surface deeper layers of belief in material reality that need to be seen and released. The apparent worsening isn't a sign that consciousness isn't working. It's evidence that consciousness is working so powerfully that everything unlike itself is being exposed to be recognized as nothing. This is the refining fire that Jesus spoke about. Rebecca went through 3 months where practicing recognition seemed to make her financial situation worse instead of better. Every time she recognized God as her infinite supply, a new unexpected expense appeared. Joel's teaching helped her understand that these appearances were the last gasp of her deep belief in limitation being brought to light. She persisted in recognition, and suddenly everything shifted. Within 2 weeks, solutions appeared that resolved not just the current crisis, but patterns that had plagued her for years. If these challenge-breaking insights resonate with your experience, like to support this transformational content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith practices, and comment which obstacle you're ready to see through to the spiritual truth beneath. Let me show you how this consciousness works in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. William was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given months to live. His family begged him to try every possible treatment. His doctors presented aggressive protocols. But William had been studying Joel Goldsmith for years and decided to rest completely in the recognition that disease has no reality in God consciousness. This wasn't denial, and it wasn't refusing medical care irresponsibly. William chose to work with doctors, but from a consciousness that knew the diagnosis had no spiritual reality. Every symptom, every test result, every prognosis he met with the same recognition. God knows nothing of this, therefore it has no actual existence, no real power, no truth. For 6 months, his physical condition didn't change at all. Then something remarkable happened. William said it wasn't that he was healed, but that he recognized he'd never been sick in spiritual reality. The cancer remained visible on scans, but he was living in such peace and freedom that his quality of life amazed everyone. After 8 months, the cancer began shrinking. After 14 months, it was gone. But William insisted the real transformation happened the day he stopped believing disease was real, not the day the diagnosis changed. Here's what Joel taught about these advanced demonstrations of consciousness. The healing isn't about changing material conditions. It's about seeing so clearly into spiritual reality that material appearances lose their power to define your experience. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "I have overcome the world." Not changed the world. Overcome it by recognizing it has no power in consciousness. Elizabeth applied this understanding to a business that was collapsing spectacularly. Partners had stolen from her. Debts were crushing. Bankruptcy seemed inevitable. Traditional spiritual advice said to visualize success, affirm abundance, take inspired action. But Joel's teaching went deeper. Elizabeth practiced recognizing that in God consciousness, there is no business to fail, no partners to betray, no debt to crush. Only infinite spiritual substance expressing perfectly. For 4 months, circumstances kept deteriorating while Elizabeth maintained recognition. Her attorney thought she was crazy for being so peaceful, facing financial ruin. But Elizabeth had discovered what Joel meant by the burden being light. She wasn't carrying the business collapse, wasn't carrying the betrayal, wasn't carrying the financial pressure. She was resting in consciousness while letting appearances run their course. When the breakthrough came, it came suddenly and completely, with opportunities that not only restored, but multiplied what appeared to have been lost. The most advanced practice Joel taught is maintaining consciousness in the face of other people's suffering. This is where most spiritual students fail, because their compassion pulls them into believing the appearance is real. You see someone in pain and want desperately to help, to fix, to heal. But Joel taught that the greatest help you can give anyone is to not believe in their burden, to see through the appearance to their perfect spiritual reality. Richard, a chaplain in a children's hospital, struggled terribly with this. How could he look at sick children and not believe in their suffering? How could he practice Joel's teaching without becoming cold and uncaring? What he discovered transformed not only his ministry, but the actual outcomes for families he served. When he stopped believing in the reality of childhood disease and instead recognized each child's perfect spiritual identity, something shifted in the atmosphere. Parents reported feeling unexpected peace in Richard's presence. Doctors noticed that families he counseled seemed to handle crisis better. And over time, Richard witnessed several cases where children recovered in ways that defied medical explanation. Not because he prayed for healing, but because his consistent recognition of spiritual perfection created an atmosphere where truth could be seen more clearly. This is the advanced consciousness that Joel taught, where your recognition serves everyone without trying to help anyone. Here's the ultimate challenge of living this consciousness. You'll reach a point where you see clearly that there is no personal you to live this consciousness. The one who's been practicing recognition, maintaining awareness, seeing through appearances, that one doesn't exist either. There is only consciousness being itself, appearing as what seems to be your individual experience. This recognition can be terrifying because it dissolves everything you thought you were. Nicole went through what Joel called the dark night of the soul when she recognized that not only were her burdens illusory, but the self she thought was overcoming, those burdens was equally illusory. For 3 weeks she felt completely lost, neither here nor there, unable to return to human consciousness, but not yet stable in spiritual recognition. Joel taught that this dissolution of personal identity is actually the gateway to true freedom. What emerged for Nicole was a consciousness that no longer alternated between burden and freedom, between human and spiritual, between problem and solution. There was simply consciousness being itself without any sense of a separate Nicole trying to maintain anything. From that recognition, life became genuinely effortless. Not because circumstances were always pleasant, but because there was no one there to be burdened by circumstances. This is what Jesus demonstrated, and what Joel spent his life teaching others to recognize in themselves. Now you understand why Jesus said, "My burden is light." He wasn't offering comfort for your human struggles. He was revealing that in Christ consciousness, in the recognition of your true spiritual identity, burdens cannot exist, not because they become easier to carry, but because the one who seemed to be carrying them is recognized as illusory. There is only God consciousness being itself as infinite individual expression. This is the complete transformation that Joel Goldsmith devoted his life to teaching. Not a better human life, not improved circumstances, not even healing of body or finances, though those often occur. The transformation is from believing you're a limited material being separate from God to recognizing you are consciousness itself, whole, complete, and perfect right now. Not becoming perfect, already perfect, always have been perfect, cannot be anything but perfect. When you live from this recognition, everything changes while nothing changes. Circumstances may improve or may not. Your body may heal or may not. Your relationships may transform or may not. But you are free regardless because you've recognized that your true being is untouched by any human experience whatsoever. The burden is light because there is no burden. There never was a burden. There's only consciousness being itself perfectly. Let me show you what this looks like in actual daily living. You wake up in the morning, and instead of immediately thinking about your problems, your responsibilities, your burdens, you pause and recognize you are consciousness waking to itself. The person who seemed to sleep, who has problems to solve and burdens to carry, is just an appearance in consciousness like a character in a dream. Your true identity is the consciousness itself, the awareness in which everything appears. Throughout your day, challenges arise, decisions need to be made, responsibilities must be handled. But you're meeting everything from consciousness rather than from a separate self trying to manage life. You're not trying to lighten your burdens. You're recognizing that burdens have no reality in what you actually are. This isn't denial of human experience. It's seeing through human experience to the spiritual truth that underlies it. Brian describes living this way as being in the world, but not of it. Exactly what Jesus taught. He goes to work, handles problems, interacts with people, fulfills responsibilities, but he's no longer identified with any of it. He's consciousness watching itself appear as Brian's life, while knowing that nothing in that appearance has the power to be a burden, because nothing in it is ultimately real. The burden is light because it has no weight in consciousness itself. Here's what happens over time as you stabilize in this consciousness. You stop seeking spiritual experiences because you recognize you are the spiritual presence itself. You stop trying to improve yourself because you see there's no separate self to improve. You stop wanting circumstances to change because you know that consciousness is complete, regardless of what appears to be happening in form. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop caring. It means you act from wholeness rather than from need, from consciousness rather than from fear, from grace rather than from effort. Joel called this living by grace, and it's the most natural, effortless way to live because you're no longer fighting against reality or trying to change it. You're simply being what you already are, while letting consciousness live itself as your experience. Angela says the greatest freedom came when she realized she didn't have to maintain this consciousness, couldn't lose it, and had never actually been without it. The struggle to be conscious was itself the last burden to release. When she saw that consciousness is what she is, not what she has or maintains, everything became simple. The burden wasn't just light, It was completely absent because there was no separate one there to carry anything. This is the secret Jesus was teaching when he said, "Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He was saying, recognize your true identity as Christ consciousness, and every burden disappears in that recognition. Not because circumstances change, though they often do, but because you see clearly that burdens exist only in the belief that you're something other than consciousness itself. Joel Goldsmith spent 40 years making this teaching practical and accessible. He showed thousands of students how to move from intellectual understanding to actual recognition, from concept to consciousness, from belief to being. His gift was making mystical truth so clear and practical that anyone willing to practice can experience the same freedom that Jesus demonstrated and that Joel lived. You now have everything you need to let the burden become light in your experience, not by trying to lighten it, but by seeing through it to the truth of what you are. Consciousness itself, whole, complete, perfect, free, and utterly unburdened by any appearance whatsoever. This is your true nature, always has been, always will be, and nothing can change or diminish it. The burden is light because in truth, there is no burden at all. If your understanding of Jesus' teaching has been completely transformed by these Joel Goldsmith revelations, like this video to help others discover this freedom, subscribe for more consciousness awakening content, and comment, "My burden is light," to confirm your recognition of this spiritual truth. Jesus spoke 2 words that hold the entire secret of spiritual power. Not a prayer, not a request, not a hope. Just 2 words. I am. Most people rush past this statement thinking it's just a name, but Joel Goldsmith discovered something that changes everything. When you truly understand why Jesus said I am, you unlock a consciousness that dissolves problems without effort. The mystery isn't in the words themselves. It's in the consciousness behind them. When Jesus said I am, he wasn't identifying with a body or a personality. He was declaring the presence of God as his only identity. This wasn't philosophy. This was the ultimate healing principle that transformed water into wine and raised the dead through pure consciousness. You've been taught to seek God outside yourself, to pray to something distant, to beg for what you need. But the I am reveals a truth that shatters every limitation. God isn't something you reach for. God is the very I that you are. When you grasp this, everything in your life begins to shift, not because you're doing more, but because you're understanding what has always been true. Joel Goldsmith spent decades discovering what Jesus really meant. He found that I am isn't a statement about your human self. It's not about your personality, your history, or your circumstances. The I am is the infinite presence expressing as you right now. When you say I am with spiritual awareness, you're not speaking as a limited person. You're speaking as consciousness itself. Think about how you use these words daily. I am sick, I am broke, I am afraid. Every time you attach I am to a condition, you're giving power to illusion. You're identifying the infinite with the finite. You're claiming that God, the I of your being, is limited by circumstances. This is the root of all suffering. Not what happens to you, but what you claim I am is. Jesus never said I am sick or I am lacking. He said I am the resurrection. I am the light. I am the way. He was identifying with the infinite, not the condition. When you begin to use I am only with truth, with what is eternal and unchanging, your entire experience begins to mirror that consciousness. This isn't positive thinking. This is spiritual law. Here's what Joel discovered that few teachers reveal. The I am isn't something you create or develop. It already is. You don't become the I am through practice or achievement. You simply stop identifying with what you are not. Every problem in your life exists because you've forgotten that the I that you are is God expressing. Not will be. Not can become. Yes, when you're facing illness, the temptation is to say, I am sick and I need healing. But the moment you claim I am sick, you've denied the truth of your being. The I that you are cannot be sick because that I is infinite spirit. The body may show symptoms, yes, but that's not the I. The I am is perfect, whole, complete. When you rest in this knowing, healing happens naturally. The same applies to every area of life. Not I am poor and need supply, but I am the infinite abundance of God made visible. Not I am alone and need love, but I am the presence of love itself. This isn't denial of circumstances. This is recognition of what lies beneath all circumstances. The eternal I that is your true identity, unchanged by any condition that appears in the world of form. Most spiritual teachings give you something to do. Visualize, affirm, manifest. But Jesus revealed something far more powerful. He revealed a state of being. I am is not an action. It's a recognition. When you truly understand this, you stop trying to get things from God and start realizing that God is already the substance of your being, expressing as your experience. This is why Joel taught that healing isn't about changing conditions. It's about changing identity. When you know yourself as the I am, the infinite presence, conditions have no choice but to align with that truth. You don't heal the body. You recognize that the I of your being was never sick. You don't create abundance. You recognize that the I am is infinite supply. Here's the transformation that happens when this understanding deepens. You stop living from the level of effect. You stop reacting to appearances. You rest in the I am, and from that resting place, every need is met, every problem dissolves, every fear vanishes. Not through struggle, but through spiritual recognition. This is the secret Jesus lived. This is what Joel spent his life teaching. Let me share what happened to a woman named Margaret who attended Joel's classes in the 1950s. She'd suffered with chronic pain for 7 years. Doctors found nothing wrong. She'd tried every treatment, every therapy, every healing method available. Nothing worked. She came to Joel desperate, exhausted, and ready to give up hope entirely. Joel didn't pray for her. He didn't treat her condition. He simply asked her one question: who is the I that says I am in pain? Margaret was confused at first. She said, I am. I'm the one suffering. But Joel pressed deeper. Is the I am you speak of capable of pain? Can infinite spirit hurt? Can God suffer? She sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes. Then something shifted in her consciousness. She realized she'd been identifying her true self, the I am, with a body and its sensations. The pain didn't belong to the I that she was. It belonged to a false sense of identity. Within 3 weeks, the pain began to diminish. Within 2 months, it was completely gone. Not because she fought it, but because she stopped claiming it as her identity. A businessman named Robert used this same principle with his failing company. He was on the edge of bankruptcy, drowning in debt, watching everything he'd built crumble. Every morning he'd wake up thinking, I am failing, I am losing everything. His prayers were desperate pleas for God to save his business, to send customers, to provide a miracle from outside himself. Then Robert heard Joel speak about the I am. He realized he'd been claiming lack as his identity. He'd been saying, I am broke, instead of recognizing that the I of his being is infinite supply. He began a daily practice. Every morning before looking at numbers or emails, he'd sit quietly and recognize, I am is the abundance of God. I am is infinite resource. I am is divine intelligence expressing. It took 4 months, not 4 days. But slowly, ideas came. Connections appeared. Opportunities opened that had been invisible before. His business didn't just survive. It transformed into something more aligned with his true purpose. The change wasn't in his circumstances first. It was in his consciousness. When he stopped identifying with lack, abundance had space to flow through him naturally. Joel worked with a mother whose son was addicted to drugs. She'd prayed for years. She'd begged God to change her son. She'd tried intervention, therapy, tough love, enabling, everything. Nothing worked. Her son kept using, kept disappearing, kept breaking her heart. She came to Joel exhausted, guilt-ridden, desperate for someone to fix her child. Joel told her something that shocked her. Stop praying for your son to change. Stop seeing him as an addict. Stop identifying him with his condition. Instead, recognize the truth. Your son's real identity is I am, the presence of God. That presence cannot be addicted. That presence is whole, free, and perfect right now. See only that truth, regardless of what appears. She practiced this for 6 months. Some days her son seemed worse. But she held to the truth of his being, not the appearance of his behavior. She stopped mothering the addiction and started recognizing the Christ. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, something shifted in him. He entered treatment on his own. He stayed. Today, years later, he's free. Not because she changed him, but because she stopped empowering the false identity. These stories aren't exceptions. They're examples of spiritual law in action. When you stop identifying with conditions and start identifying with the I am, your true nature, reality must conform to that recognition. This isn't magic. This isn't wishful thinking. This is how consciousness works. What you claim as your identity becomes your experience. Joel taught that the great barrier to healing and transformation is personal sense. The belief that you are a separate person with personal problems needing personal solutions. But the I am has no personal problems. The I am is infinite, perfect, whole. When you rest in that identity, even for moments, the personal sense with all its troubles begins to dissolve. Here's the practice Joel gave his students. Throughout your day, whenever fear or lack or pain appears, pause. Ask yourself, who is experiencing this? Is it the I am, or is it the false sense of personal self? Then gently return to the truth. I am is the presence of God. I am is whole. I am is supplied. Don't fight the condition. Simply withdraw your identification from it. If these transformation stories inspire you and you're beginning to see the power of true identity, like this video to help others discover these teachings, subscribe for more. Joel Goldsmith Wisdom, and comment. Which story of consciousness transformation resonated most deeply with your own spiritual journey? Now let's go deeper into how you actually live from this consciousness. Understanding I am intellectually doesn't transform your life. You must practice it until it becomes your natural state of being. Joel called this practicing the presence. Not thinking about God, not praying to God, but recognizing that the I of your being is God, right here, right now, in this moment. Start with the smallest moments. When you wake up, before your mind fills with problems and tasks, recognize, I am awake. Not a person waking to face another difficult day, but I am, infinite consciousness, expressing as this experience. When you eat, recognize, I am sustained by infinite substance. When you work, recognize, I am is the intelligence accomplishing this task. This isn't affirmation. Affirmations try to make something true. This is recognition of what already is true. The difference is profound. Affirmations come from lack, trying to create what you don't have. Recognition comes from wholeness, acknowledging what has always been present. One struggles, the other rests. One seeks, the other realizes. Joel taught a specific technique for moments of crisis or intense challenge. He called it the pause. When fear grips you, when pain overwhelms you, when circumstances seem impossible, you pause everything. You don't react. You don't try to solve. You don't panic. You pause and return to the I am. This simple act interrupts the false identity and opens space for truth. In the pause, you ask, what is the truth of my being right now? Not what appears, but what is eternally true. The truth is always the same. I am is the presence of God, untouched by any condition. I am is whole. I am is supplied. I am is safe. Not because circumstances prove it, but because this is the nature of infinite being expressing as you. A woman used this during a medical crisis. Her doctor found a mass and scheduled immediate surgery. Terror consumed her, but she remembered the pause. Every time fear arose, she stopped. She didn't deny the situation or fight the fear. She simply returned to truth. I am is perfect life. I am cannot be threatened. By the time of her pre-surgery scan, the mass had vanished completely. Another powerful practice Joel taught is releasing judgment. Every time you judge yourself or others, you're operating from personal sense, not I am consciousness. The I am doesn't judge because the I am recognizes only itself in all. When you see someone struggling, you're not seeing their true identity. You're seeing a false sense of separation appearing as a person with problems. This doesn't mean ignoring behavior or boundaries. It means seeing beyond the appearance to the truth. When someone wrongs you, the human reaction is anger, hurt, judgment. But from I am consciousness, you recognize this person's true identity is also I am, the presence of God. They've forgotten, just as you've forgotten at times. This recognition doesn't condone wrong action. It heals the consciousness behind it. Practice this with yourself first. When you fail, when you make mistakes, when you fall short of your ideals, stop the self-judgment. That judgment is personal sense attacking personal sense. Instead, return to truth. The I that you are never failed because the I am is perfect. The mistake happened in the dream of personal identity. Wake up to your real self and begin again from wholeness. The third essential practice is what Joel called impersonal supply. You've been taught that supply comes from jobs, people, investments, sources outside yourself. This creates fear. What if the source dries up? What if you lose the job? What if the person leaves? But when you understand that I am is infinite supply, you realize source is never outside you. Your employer isn't your source. Your clients aren't your source. Your investments aren't your source. I am is your source, and that source is infinite, never-ending, always flowing. The channels may change. One job may end and another begin. One stream of income may dry up while 3 others open. But the source, the I am, never diminishes, never fails, never runs out. Live from this knowing. When you pay bills, recognize I am is infinite supply making itself visible. When you work, recognize I am is the substance of my abundance. When you give, recognize I am gives from infinite fullness, not from personal limitation. This consciousness attracts supply through unexpected channels, synchronistic opportunities, and ways you could never have planned or manipulated into being. But let's be honest about the challenges. Knowing this truth and living it consistently are different things. You'll have moments where you forget completely, where fear overwhelms the truth, where circumstances seem so real, so pressing, so urgent that I am consciousness feels like fantasy. Joel experienced this too. Every spiritual teacher has. This is normal. This is part of the journey. The first challenge is when nothing seems to change. You practice, you recognize, you identify as I am, and your circumstances remain the same. The illness continues. The lack persists. The problem doesn't dissolve. Your mind screams, this doesn't work. You're fooling yourself. You need to take action, to do something, to fix it the old way through human effort and struggle. Joel's answer was simple but not easy. Spiritual realization works in consciousness first, not in conditions. Sometimes the inner shift happens quickly and outer change follows immediately. Sometimes the inner work takes weeks or months of consistent practice before you see evidence in the physical. Your job isn't to make things happen. Your job is to know the truth and remain faithful to it, regardless of appearances. The second challenge is other people's reactions. When you start living from I am consciousness, you become different. You stop complaining. You stop participating in fear-based conversations. You stop agreeing that circumstances are terrible and hopeless. Some people will think you're in denial. Others will think you've joined a cult. Some will actively try to pull you back into agreement with limitation. A man in Joel's classes lost friends when he stopped engaging in their constant complaints about money, health, and politics. They thought he didn't care. They accused him of being cold, disconnected, superior. But he wasn't judging them. He simply couldn't participate in claiming lack and limitation as truth anymore. He had to choose, comfort of agreement or integrity of consciousness. This is your choice too. You cannot live in 2 worlds. You cannot claim I am is infinite abundance in meditation and then spend your day agreeing with everyone that times are hard and money is scarce. You cannot recognize I am is perfect health in prayer and then spend hours discussing symptoms and diseases. Choose your consciousness carefully because it's choosing your experience. The third challenge is impatience. You want transformation now. You want healing today. You want abundance this week. But consciousness unfolds at its own pace. A seed doesn't become a tree overnight. The invisible work happens first. Roots go deep before the shoot appears above ground. Your consistent practice is the root work. Trust that something is happening even when you see no evidence. Joel worked with a man whose business was failing for 2 years. He practiced I am consciousness every day. Some months seemed better, then worse again. He was tempted to give up the practice and return to human struggle and manipulation, but something kept him faithful. In the 3rd year, everything shifted, not gradually but suddenly. Opportunities exploded, money flowed, the business tripled. Later he understood why. The first 2 years were preparing his consciousness. He was learning to truly rest in I am instead of anxiously trying to make things happen from personal effort. When his consciousness was finally clear, when he truly knew himself as infinite supply, the outer world had no choice but to mirror that knowing. The delay wasn't punishment. It was preparation for a blessing his old consciousness couldn't have sustained. The 4th challenge is mixing practices. You try I am consciousness for a week. Nothing happens fast enough, so you add visualization techniques, then affirmations, then manifestation rituals. Then you ask others to pray for you. You mix truth with methods that operate from lack. This creates confusion in consciousness. You're saying I am is complete while simultaneously acting like you need something outside yourself. Joel was firm about this. You cannot serve 2 masters. Either I am is your sufficiency or it isn't. Either God is the substance of your being or you need to manipulate conditions. Either you trust spiritual identity or you trust human effort. Mixing the 2 cancels both. Choose one path and commit to it completely, especially when fear screams at you to hedge your bets. Here's how to navigate these challenges. First, give yourself grace. You're unlearning lifetimes of false identity. Second, return to truth without guilt when you forget. Third, find even one person who understands this consciousness. Joel's students supported each other through doubt. Fourth, measure progress by your inner peace, not outer conditions. Peace in the midst of challenge proves consciousness is shifting. If these insights about overcoming consciousness challenges speak to your heart and you're ready to commit to this path, like this video to support authentic spiritual teaching, subscribe for advanced practices in Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. Which challenge are you facing right now and ready to transform through I am consciousness? Let's explore advanced applications of I am consciousness in specific life areas. First, relationships. Most relationship problems come from seeking completion in another person. You feel incomplete, so you look for someone to fill the emptiness. You feel unloved, so you need someone to love you. But this places impossible demands on human relationships and guarantees disappointment. When you recognize I am is infinite love, the nature of your being, everything changes. You're not seeking love. You're expressing the love you are. You don't need completion from another. You're already whole. Relationships become sharing of wholeness rather than trading of neediness. This doesn't mean you don't desire partnership. It means you desire it from fullness, not from lack. A woman practiced this after 3 failed marriages. She stopped looking for someone to make her happy and started recognizing I am is infinite love and joy. For a year, she focused only on knowing herself as complete. Then she met someone. But this relationship was different. No desperation. No clinging, no fear of loss, just 2 whole people choosing to share life. That marriage is thriving 20 years later because it's built on truth, not need. Second, health. Medical treatment has its place, but I am consciousness reveals something deeper. Your body isn't your identity. The I am you are is pure spirit, perfect life, incapable of disease. This doesn't mean denying symptoms or refusing care. It means not identifying with the condition. You have a body showing symptoms. You are not those symptoms. The I that you are is eternally whole. Joel healed himself of tuberculosis through this understanding. Doctors said he had months to live, but he refused to claim the disease as his identity. He didn't fight it or fear it. He simply rested in the knowing, I am is perfect life. The disease has nothing to do with my true identity. His body healed completely, and he lived decades beyond the doctor's prognosis, teaching this principle to thousands. Practice this with any health challenge. Don't say I am sick. Say the body is showing symptoms, but I am is whole. Don't identify with the diagnosis. Recognize that diagnosis describes a condition in matter, but your true self is spirit. untouched by material conditions. Work with doctors, take medicine if needed, but know these are aids for the body. Your real healing comes from recognizing what you truly are. Third, your work and purpose. Most people see their job as how they survive. They trade time and energy for money. They endure work they hate because they need income. But I Am consciousness transforms work from survival into expression. The work you do becomes how infinite intelligence and creativity flow into visible form. Not work you must do, but work you're designed to do. When you recognize I Am is infinite intelligence, you stop forcing. You stop trying to figure everything out through limited human thinking. You pause, you recognize the I Am, and you allow ideas to flow from that infinite source. The right work finds you. The right opportunities appear. The right people cross your path, not through networking and manipulation, but through spiritual alignment. A teacher felt trapped in her job for 15 years. She knew she was meant for something else, but couldn't see what or how. She began practicing I Am consciousness. She stopped trying to plan her escape and started recognizing, I Am is divine intelligence knowing exactly what I'm here to express. Within 6 months, an opportunity appeared that was perfect. She transitioned naturally into work that fed her soul and doubled her income. Fourth, dealing with enemies or difficult people. Jesus said, love your enemies. Most think that's impossible or naive. But from I Am consciousness, it makes perfect sense. The person attacking you isn't your enemy. They're the infinite I Am who has forgotten their identity. When you see past their behavior to their true nature, you're not condoning wrong action. You're recognizing reality beneath appearance. This is practical, not sentimental. A man had a business partner who betrayed him, stole clients, spread lies. Human reaction is revenge, anger, hatred. But this man practiced I Am consciousness. He didn't pretend the betrayal didn't hurt. But he refused to see his partner as an enemy. He recognized, this person's true identity is I Am, just confused and operating from fear right now. The result was astonishing. As he held this consciousness, refusing to engage in hatred or revenge, something shifted. His former partner's schemes began to fail. The lies were exposed without the man saying a word. Within a year, the partner reached out and apologized, making full restitution. Not because the man manipulated or planned it, because consciousness operating from truth is more powerful than all human scheming operating from falsehood. Now we're ready for the ultimate integration. Living as I Am isn't something you do during meditation or when problems arise. It becomes your constant state. You wake as I Am. You walk as I Am. You work as I Am. You love as I Am. You rest as I Am. Every experience becomes the infinite expressing in finite form. You're no longer a person trying to be spiritual. Your spirit appearing as person. This doesn't make you perfect in behavior. You'll still make mistakes, still have preferences, still experience the full range of human emotion. But underneath it all, you know what you are. A wave still looks like a wave, moves like a wave, has its unique shape. But it never forgets its ocean. You're the wave that knows itself as the infinite sea, expressing in this particular form. Joel lived this way. People around him felt something different. Not superiority or detachment, but presence. When he entered a room, consciousness shifted. When he spoke, people's problems often dissolved without him directly addressing them. Why? Because he lived so consistently from I Am consciousness that it radiated from him, lifting everyone near him into that same recognition without words. You can live this way too, not by trying to be like Joel, not by imitating his words or methods, but by practicing what he taught until the I Am becomes your living reality. Start today, right now. Whatever you're facing, whatever challenge or fear or need is pressing on you, pause. Stop trying to solve it humanly. Stop seeing yourself as a person with a problem. Return to truth. Recognize, I Am is the only presence and power. I Am is whole. I Am is supplied. I Am is safe. I Am is loved. Not because conditions prove it, but because this is the eternal nature of being. You're not trying to become this. You're recognizing what you already are. This recognition isn't escape from reality. This recognition is reality. Everything else is the dream of separation appearing temporarily in consciousness. As this becomes your foundation, watch what happens. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily, consistently, powerfully. Problems that seemed impossible begin to dissolve. Needs you struggled to meet begin to be fulfilled through unexpected channels. Relationships that were painful begin to heal or gracefully end. Health that was failing begins to restore. Not because you made it happen, because you stopped blocking it with false identity. Joel Goldsmith left you an incredible gift. Not a religion, not a set of rules, not a system to follow perfectly. He left you the key to the kingdom that Jesus taught. That key is recognizing what the words "I am" truly mean. When Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life," he wasn't claiming something special for himself alone. He was revealing what every human being truly is beneath the costume of personality. You are not your name. You are not your history. You are not your circumstances. You are not your body, your bank account, your relationships, your achievements, or your failures. All of these are experiences flowing through consciousness. But the I that is aware of all these experiences, the I that existed before any of these conditions appeared and will exist after they all change, that I is God expressing as your individuality. This is why Jesus could heal, could multiply loaves and fishes, could walk on water, could rise from death. Not because he was different from you in essence, because he knew what he was and never forgot it. He lived completely from I am consciousness. And he said, "These things you will do also, and greater things." Not might do if you're special. Will do when you understand what you are. This is your invitation and your destiny. So what happens when you truly understand why Jesus said, "I am"? Everything changes. Your problems don't all vanish in one moment. Your life doesn't become perfect tomorrow, but something shifts at the core of your being. You stop living from fear and lack. You stop identifying with conditions. You stop seeking outside yourself for what you already are. You rest in the infinite presence that you've always been. From this resting place, transformation flows naturally. Healing happens without effort. Supply appears without strain. Relationships align without manipulation. Purpose unfolds without forcing. Not because you've gained something new, but because you've remembered something ancient. You've remembered that the I of your being is the I of God, one infinite presence expressing uniquely as you. This is Joel Goldsmith's greatest teaching. This is Jesus' ultimate revelation. This is the secret hidden in plain sight in two simple words that contain all power, all healing, all supply, all love, all life. I am, not will be, not should be, not trying to be. Simply, eternally, completely, I am. Live from this knowing and watch your entire world transform from the inside out. If your understanding of spiritual identity has been transformed forever through these Joel Goldsmith teachings, like this video to help others discover their true nature. Subscribe for more profound consciousness wisdom, and comment, "I am," to claim your recognition of the infinite presence you truly are right now.